passage that we saw last week saw a great turn in our series. Everything starts to turn around, starts to shift. And what it would seem very, perhaps insignificant, Jesus in our sermon last week was doing what he always does. He starts talking, starts teaching, he does a healing, but it was remarkable is the first mention, one, of Peter proclaiming Jesus to be the Messiah. It's the first time we explicitly hear that Jesus is the Messiah. He doesn't refute it, he just commands the silence on it for right now, because that can be misinterpreted and misunderstood. As Peter shows that he did misunderstand, because it is not simply that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God, which is what the first half of the book of Mark is about. Mark is trying to show us, who is this person? Who is this Jesus? And we get to the end of Mark 8, and it's so clear he's the Messiah, but not the Messiah you're picturing. He's the Messiah who's going to suffer. He's the Messiah who's going to die. Now the rest of this passage, the rest of this book is pointing us to understand, we need to understand that Jesus came to suffer. He came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And as we're making this turn in the Gospel of Mark, as we shift deeper in understanding the suffering that Jesus came to do, our passage continues to help us with this turn. We're in our passage before us today, what is known as an episode called the Transfiguration. We're seeing in remarkable detail that Jesus is the Son of God. We're seeing again that first half of Mark thesis, right? Of this is who Jesus is. He is God in flesh, as our call to worship tells us. He is God in flesh. We see that explicitly here, but that all takes place on a mountaintop and on the way down. Again, that theme of suffering, that theme of death comes back again. It's going to be a great guide for us today as we understand our own suffering, our own trials, our own difficulties. So follow with me here in Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 13. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept this matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, "Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" And he said to them, "Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has come. They did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him." It's the word of the Lord. You know, it amuses me that I carry around with me a really incredibly high quality camera and video recorder in my pocket at all times, as do many of you. I mean, you think, if you guys are old enough like me, that like the first time you bought a digital camera, right? And just like had a camera back when they weren't installed in phones. And just you had to go and get it, make sure it was charged, to be able to take a picture of something. Now, like any moment you can. And even so, with kids, with my kids at home, I'm reaching for my camera and I can't still get it open fast enough to record what they're doing. They're saying or singing something cute. By the time my phone's open, I've missed it, right? Just by that much. I've not really captured them in that moment. Or I can try to get them to repeat it. But then the odd thing is, if I have my phone open, I have the camera going, or I'm taking the video. There's another part of me wondering, am I really watching? Am I staying in this moment, or I'm just surveying what's happening through the video, through the camera, through the screen? It's a strange kind of way to live and understand. If you're experiencing something great, perhaps you're at a camera or at a concert. Do you want to be enjoying the concert through the video you're taking that you're really not going to show anyone ever because the quality really is terrible, but you're doing it just because, well, I'm at a concert, I should video this, right? Are you really experiencing that, or just trying to preserve it for something later? It's a difficult thing. There's a lot of money we put into trying to preserve memories. There's a reason why, in terms of wedding expenses, your photographer is one of the more expensive ones, because you want to preserve the memory. But you also want to make sure while you're there that you're not the one taking the pictures, that you can be mentally there. You can be surveying it with your eyes so that you can carry it with you. It's a difficult thing, right? Our lives are so temporary. They move on and on and on. How do we carry our experiences with us? I think this is really interesting in our passage today because it's a really sudden and quick moment. The way Mark writes it, it seems to have happened in just a matter of maybe minutes, long enough for Jesus to be chatting with Moses and Elijah. Peter makes the suggestion to make some tents so they can stay there, camp out on the mountaintop in this amazing, indescribable experience. And then it's over. And as they go down, the passage seems kind of anticlimactic, right? They're going down and they're just kind of chatting, but about something else. They're not even really understanding what happened. The way Mark lays this out, you can imagine how much the disciples probably wish they had a camera with them. How much they wish they could kind of keep this with them, the memory with them, to look back and understand it. In our own lives, in our journey with God, in moments of great spiritual enjoyment, or great revelation where things finally click, or perhaps in your life you've felt times where you feel very close to God, and right now you're in quite a desert and you feel very far from Him, with a lot of questions, but no answers. And you wish you could just go back in time to that time where things felt like you were on the mountaintop, where things felt clearer, where things felt more obvious. The closeness of God felt much more warm. You wish you could take that with you. How do we do that? I think our passage today, we have this up and down trajectory. They're going up on the mountain. They have this great experience. Then they go down the mountain. And going down the mountain seems a lot more just negative in terms of what they're talking about. But it is what happens on the mountain, but also what they talk about going down that helps them take this good news with them. And I'll show you what I mean here, that we see this glory on the mountaintop, but understanding the command there of listen to Christ is what is going to help us connect the glory of the mountain all the way as we go down. We need to understand that there is great glory in the presence of God, that in following His commands, we can know how to live and walk through our life. That last point, that lesson is much more about how we journey through life, because we can't stay on the mountain forever. We can't stay in that great high moment of feeling awesome and feeling really spiritual and feeling really connected to God. We don't feel that way all the time, but how do we take that experience all the way through, even into our sufferings? How can we take these experiences through our suffering and know that God is with us the whole way? Let's understand the glory that is happening here. This is talking about in the first place, like, what do you take with you? This is a sermon where I didn't know what to leave at my desk and what to bring into the sermon. There's for how short it is, there's a lot of density here. A lot of Old Testament connections. So many, right? But I think the important ones really come from, if we're talking about Old Testament connections, is the seemingly random presence of these two Old Testament figures. We have Elijah here. We have Moses here. Now, I guess that most of you probably have heard of or know who Moses is. Elijah doesn't have a book just about him. Elijah is a prophet from First Kings, right? But he has a lot of very important episodes as he was against King Ahab. But we know who Moses was, right? He led God's people out of Egypt in the Exodus. He led them through the wilderness. He led them to Mount Sinai and delivered the law for God's people. Really, as the Israelites really gained a strong identity for themselves, was at Mount Sinai. And Moses was that prophet who helped them through that. A prophet is someone who reveals the will of God and the word of God. And this is what Moses did in bringing the law to them. But Moses wanted them to understand, I'm not the guy. I'm not the last prophet. There's one coming who's greater than I. You need to look for him. In Deuteronomy, which is really just the second giving of the law, before they go into the promised land, it's the kind of almost like final sermon from Moses. Deuteronomy 18, verse 15 says, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me among you. From your brothers, it is to him you shall listen. Just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord or see this great fire anymore, lest I die. They were terrified. And we're going to see later why they're terrified at the mountain of Sinai. They needed that prophet. They needed someone like Moses to go and speak for God. The Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth. He shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words, that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. So there's two commands here, right? As Moses finishes up, look for this other great prophet like Moses, and you better be listening to him, right? The emphasis is that there's a prophet who will speak the words like Moses. And so you know what's happening? Why is Moses all of a sudden appearing as Jesus' whole being becomes enshrouded in this bright white light? Moses appears to say, this is the guy we've been talking about. This is the guy I said to wait for. Listen to him. Like his very presence is confirming that this is the Messiah. So what does Elijah have to do with this, right? As I said, Elijah was this prophet in 1 Kings. Ahab was a really wicked king. And Elijah did all he could to confront King Ahab and convict him of his abuses and convict him of his sin. And at the end of the Old Testament, God's people are told, wait for Elijah. At the end of the Old Testament, Elijah's been dead a very long time, hundreds of years. And they're saying Elijah's going to come again. The end of Malachi. These are the last words of the Old Testament. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the statute and rules that I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel. Remember, going back to Moses, remember him. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And I will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. Now imagine for me here, if you're reading through the Bible, like just sequentially, and you get to the end of Malachi, you get to the end of the Old Testament, like that's the end. This is how it ends. Remember my servant Moses, and I'm sending you Elijah. And imagine you go right here to Mark 9. Who shows up? Moses and Elijah. You're seeing this strong, vivid connection between everything that was prepared in the Old Testament. And Jesus here is that fulfillment of that. What does Elijah have to do? Has Elijah already come? Is it him just showing up? No, even before this passage, we know that Elijah in some ways has come. But not literally the Elijah that lived years ago, but John the Baptist fulfilled that Malachi prophecy, for he came in the mode of Elijah. For Mark 1 begins with these words, this citation from Malachi. Mark 1 begins referencing this. And Mark is trying to turn the hearts of people back. He's calling them to turn back to God. And you know what happens? As we saw in Mark 6, he confronts a wicked king, just like Elijah confronted King Ahab. King Herod is confronted, and John the Baptist is killed. John the Baptist's suffering prepares the way for Jesus. In all these ways, Moses and Elijah being here are proclaiming the glory of Jesus. Hey, everything you've been told to look out for, everything you've been told to wait for is here. It is now. It has arrived. Peter's picking up on this, right? He wants to camp out and wants to set up tents. And just as those words are out of his mouth, a cloud descends on the mountain. Clouds on mountaintops aren't all that special, right? I mean, they're high up in the air. Mountains can descend on them, particularly on a nice foggy day. But in these circumstances, the idea of a cloud descending as Jesus is transfigured, as Moses, especially Moses is right there, but let's also not forget Elijah, it has a very strong theological meaning. The glory and presence of Yahweh. We know that because there's a reason why I had this be our confession reading this morning from Exodus. That when God's people arrived in the book of Exodus to Mount Sinai, where the law would be given, the cloud of Yahweh that was leading them descended on this mountain. It was terrifying. It was holy. It was amazing. On the third day, Exodus tells us, there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln. The whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Can you imagine being there at the foot of the mountain? The terror, the glory, the awesome presence of God. The people were terrified. Can you imagine even more being Moses, the one who goes up to the mountain, right? To stand before that presence. It is what the Hebrew word is, the Shekinah glory of God. It's descending before the eyes of the people. And they look, and the reason why Moses goes up is because they're terrified. They need someone to go up to be this mediator between them. They need that prophet to shield themselves from that full glory. They need a way to mediate. The glory is almost too much, right? But they know they need to be here. Can you imagine that moment for you? What are you to take away from this? Perhaps there have been times where you felt the great conviction in your heart at understanding who God is and understanding your sin. You might feel far from God and you ask, what can I do? And the answer is Jesus has been, by his sacrifice, that way to the Father. That fulfillment of Moses, that even just by going up, Jesus not only went up, he went up on the cross to die for you, that you might be able to stand in the glory of God. And you know why we know that is true? Do you see here that Peter and James and John are standing before the transfiguration of Jesus? They are beholding the glory of God, yet they are not consumed. Jesus is that way we can stand in God's glory and not be consumed. To be in the presence of Jesus is to be able to stand the glory of God. How can we seek after a closeness to God? How can we try to behold his glory and understand it? It is in the presence of Jesus. That's why Peter wants to try to preserve this moment. He wants to set up tents. And I want to look a little bit more into what that idea is, because it can mean a whole lot of things. Maybe he's trying to capitalize on this moment. Maybe he's also trying to shield himself and have that intermediation between God's glory and himself. Peter's suggestion shows something about what he's trying to find here. He's trying to perhaps preserve this moment or shield himself from the glory. Either way, this is not what they end up doing. There's a different command. The command here is not set up tents, everybody, and camp out here. Peter suggests, as it says in verse 6, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. For he didn't know what to say, for they were terrified. It's fun because I want to try to figure out, why does Peter say this? But Mark is pretty clear. Peter doesn't know why he says this. He seems like it's a good idea to say at the time. There could be good kind of theological reason of just setting up that tent in the same way that at the foot of the mountain, when at Mount Sinai, what were the instructions that came out? It was the Ten Commandments, yes, but also the instructions for a tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the way to meet with God in a tent, right? I think there's a theme here going, that when you stand on a mountaintop before God's presence, he's a good Jewish person, good Peter thinks, tents, right? There's a little free association going on. There also could be this thing of like, this is how we do worship, right? We got to set up a tent. God's glory is here. We got to make a tent. We got to make a shelter. This is what we do. This is how we stay in God's presence, right? This is how we preserve it. But the odd thing is, that's not the answer. The command here is not to go and make tents. And I think there is a lesson for us here of we in the presence of God's glory, perhaps in a really great spiritual moment. Perhaps you've gone on a retreat and come back feeling really energized, really on fire, really excited, and you want to set up your tent in that. You want to try to preserve it. And you always find it doesn't quite last. The thing is, we are not meant to just camp out in nostalgia. We are meant to keep moving. And with that comes, it feels like the moments passes, right? The transfiguration ends and Jesus is alone. They weren't able to keep Moses and Elijah there the whole time, even though they wanted to. They got to keep moving. They got to keep traveling. We can't camp out in that nostalgia, imagining that feeling of closeness is going to be the same degree always. We need to continue to journey and mature and grow. And there's always been a desire in Christianity to try to boil down that formula. We should seek the presence and the worship of God, but not just simply for the emotional high. Sometimes people have tried to preserve this emotional or spiritual feeling through ritual and liturgy. Perhaps it's like Peter's thinking, okay, God's glory is here. The right thing to do is make a tent, right? Then people feel they get stale and old. Or it's the way that we've seen, especially in the last couple hundred years in a lot of Christian churches, where we try to really set the tone of spirituality, to really get our emotions engaged. Our emotions, our heart, should be engaged in worship, but we should be careful not to think so manipulatively, as of way there's this kind of formula where the music a certain way, the keys are this right kind, the lights do this, the worship set is this long, we sing these kind of songs, that's going to get the best emotional reaction out of people. No, we are not a bunch of marketing experts trying to get the best emotional reaction. That's that impulse to try to set up a tent and keep this emotion there forever. The emotions pass. We aren't here to worship God to excite our emotions or to try to capture this old tradition. The irony here that I think is that Peter wants to preserve this moment, to set up this tabernacle, to put up the tabernacle so we can be near God, to be in God's presence through the tent, right? Set up the tent, set up the tabernacle. But he doesn't realize the tabernacle of God's glory has been with him this whole time. He's been walking with the tabernacle. Something that we don't quite see, I think, in our English translation, but it's the reason why I had as our call to worship this morning is John 1, verse 14, where it says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The word there, dwelt, is not just living. It's tabernacled. It's tented with us. It's a very specific word trying to make us think of where is God's presence, right? Where's the Holy of Holies? It's been tabernacled in the person of Jesus Christ. It has taken on flesh. Why do we not need the tent anymore? Jesus is here. He is with us. The command here is to look to the face of Christ and know that God's presence, his glory is there. And not only just to look at him and worship him, but also to listen to him. A cloud overshadowed them. A voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. Jesus only is the one we listen to. Deuteronomy 18, look for the prophet like Moses. Listen to him. Remember the words of my prophet? Elijah's coming, and in that time, after Elijah comes, the hearts of children to their fathers will be turned. Listen to Jesus. It is not enough that we just come and stand in the presence of Jesus and God and get our emotions all riled up and feel all that glory. We must also listen to him. We not just stay in worship, but we seek for our faith to grow. We do not come to Jesus to get a feeling about him or just an experience with him, but we really take in his words. We seek with understanding. An old quote from Anselm, who talks about a faith seeking understanding. Our faith should seek to understand. Our faith should seek to listen. Yes, Jesus is the fulfillment of all these things in the Old Testament, but the Old Testament is continually telling, not simply to fall down and worship, which we must do before Jesus, but don't just camp out around him seeking that emotional experience. We must listen to Jesus. And the reason why we must listen is the whole point of coming down the mountain now. We've gone up, we're on the mountain, we know that Jesus is God, we know we should worship Jesus, we know we need to listen to him, but why? And this is where it's important, because we don't get to stay on top of the mountain forever. We don't get to stay in that emotional high, that feeling of closeness, that experience of closeness, that fuzziness forever. We endure hardship. We enter the valley. We descend. When you're walking down a mountain, when you're walking down a mountain trail, you soon realize that going down can feel all the more taxing. When we were at Devil's Lake this past fall with the men's ministry, I was kind of nursing a hurt ankle. And I was even more careful going down the bluffs of how I would step. I had even more danger of re-injuring my ankle going down. Going down in so many ways is all the more hard. The strain it puts on just the shocks of absorbing going down and down. What about the mountaintop are you going to preserve with you? Is it just pictures? Is it just memories? Or is it really knowing the face of Jesus and his words for you? So they were going down, he charged them to tell no one of what they'd seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So there are these two commands here. And they're really confused what rising from the dead means. The command from the cloud is to listen to my Son. And then Jesus says, you're going to put it in the inverse, you'll talk about it after I rise from the dead. So listen to him and talk about it after he rises from the dead. But they're like, what does this rising from the dead mean? He has just told them at the end of chapter 8, he's going to suffer greatly. He's going to die. And now he's talking about a rising from the dead. But, they're not thinking yet that this is just going to be this quick 3-day nap in a tomb and then coming out. They believe in a final resurrection. Are they talking about this final ultimate resurrection? Well, what is he talking about rising from the dead mean? Do you see how defeating all of this is? They see this amazing mountaintop experience of Elijah and Moses and the Shekinah glory of God, and Jesus coming down all normal again and saying, let's not talk about this till I rise from the dead. It's like, what? You've told us you're going to die, and we have to wait until whenever you rise from the dead. This is amazing. Why are you being so defeatist right now, Jesus? It's really quite a bit of a downer. They don't hear this talking about rise from the dead as this note of triumph. It's implicit of suffering and death, right? And he's telling them, at the end here in verse 12, the Son of Man should suffer many things, be treated with contempt, and eventually he'll, rise from the dead. So, they ask questions, what's the purpose of Elijah coming first? They're trying to change the subject, but still try to understand it. They're like, we just saw Elijah. Why do you have to come first again? And Jesus is pretty much getting as close as he can to saying, yeah, it was John the Baptist. That was Elijah. Because he was saying, Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased. He's referencing the beheading of John the Baptist in Mark 6. He's telling them, the lesson for us is that we're going to go through suffering. I will suffer for you. As we're going down the mountaintop and we're enduring suffering as we go through the valley, what are we going to take with us? And what I think for us to take with us is not only just the promise of suffering, no, that doesn't help us, but the promise of the resurrection. That's our hope here. This note on the resurrection is what's going to help us. Tim Keller argues that really, ultimately, it's worship itself that's going to sustain us, right? Peter wants to stay in that worship mode forever. But he doesn't realize he is standing with the one he must worship. He has access to God through Jesus, who he's walking down the mountain with. God is present with him now. If he could just stay and worship knowing that Jesus is with him, even if like the scene isn't there anymore, right? The scene of the transfiguration, these great Old Testament figures, the moment has passed, but God is still walking with him down the mountain. Let our hearts stay in that attitude of worship. We come here to worship, and let us carry this worship with us, knowing that Jesus, by his Spirit, is with us all the way through the week. It's not like this is some magical mountaintop place where we experience Jesus and then we got to come back here to get him again. The Spirit is with us. We walk through it all the way. Tim Keller writes, you must have access through worship to the very presence of God. You have to see clearly in your mind what God has done and is doing through Jesus. You have to experience foretastes of that embrace that God is going to give you someday. You need to actually sense what you know of God's love. Through our worship, to be here and stand in the presence is so important. Do you see how reflecting on that sustains you in the suffering that continues on? What foretastes, what sense will you continue to carry with you as you go on? As you journey down the mountain, what words of Jesus will you keep in your ears? And it's that promise of the resurrection that should anchor us in our worship. Not only that he has died so that we can have access, but he's risen again so that we know that our death is not final. This transfiguration that happens is temporary, right? It's pretty passing. It happens quite quick. It is almost like a pulling back of a curtain, as if Jesus is kind of revealing himself fully for a moment and then shielding the glory again. He's just giving a little reminder of who he is. A review of the full glory that is coming. But he's saying, you need to see my death first. I'm going to need to die first before you really understand this. You need to understand the importance of rising from the dead until you can understand it. For our journey, the lesson is the same. How do we get back to that mountaintop experience? How do we get to that true closeness? How do we really get to understand that embrace that God gives us? It is through death. But not death as this final end point. It is through death that we experience resurrection. It is that passing through death towards resurrection. We must pass through that curtain to find our bodies fully transfigured in the resurrection, fully made well, as we ought to be. I think it is quite fitting that Elijah and Moses show up here. And you know a title that they are given in a lot of just Old Testament tradition? They're known as the deathless ones. The deathless ones. For both of them, Moses, at the end of his life, went up to a mountain to foresee the promised land, to look over that land that he would not go to, but know that is promised to God's people, and no one knows except God where Moses is. No one saw him die. In that sense, he went up to a mountain to be with God, and no one knows how his death occurred. Elijah himself was taken up from a mountain in a chariot of fire, taken up by God, a deathless one. No one knows what happened. They did not taste death the way others have. They saw the triumph of the kingdom of God at the end of their earthly pilgrimage. And they are here to say, it is through this Son of Man that you also become deathless, that you will also rise again. It is through his rising again, by passing through death as if it's just a curtain blocking a greater promise. That promise can sustain you as you face the suffering that leads to death, as you face the suffering of others dying before you, as you trip and fall down the mountain. Know that you are onward marching towards this curtain of death that is just something you will pass through so that you may rise again. That is what brings us back to the mountain of God's glory. So when you all seems lost, you can consider what you are looking towards. When it appears to be a literal dead end, where are your eyes going? It had me reminded of a scene in the middle of the film Return of the King, the last Lord of the Rings movie, where we have Two of our main characters, Gandalf and Pippin, are in a situation that really looks like their death and their end. They are trying to survive a terrible siege of the city of Minas Tirith. The gate has been broken. They keep retreating. They retreat back again and again, keep trying to shelter and retreat, and the enemy army is unrelenting. The city itself appears to be all lost. They're sitting, waiting behind a barred gate that is being battered again and again and again. It's the end. And Pippin mourns. He didn't think that his life was going to end this way. But the wise, seasoned wizard Gandalf responds, "End? No, the journey does not end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all is turned to silver glass. And then you see it, white shores, and beyond a far green country under a swift sunrise." Beautiful words. A far green country under a swift sunrise. This picture of passing through life as if death is just a curtain that we move through. The words are much more powerful, I think, when you understand who's saying it here. In these books, the words are from the narrative describing something that Frodo sees as he passes through. But here in the film, the writers decide to give it to Gandalf. And there's something very interesting in that decision. Because Gandalf is describing this far green country, this heavenly place, where he actually is originally from. Like, that's where he came into being. And where he knows this land that is undying. And also, Gandalf has experienced death. He has died, and he has returned. So he knows very much about passing through this curtain of death. So if he's from this land and has gone through death there and come back, he's probably someone you should listen to, right? He seems to be somewhat of an expert on the matter. When you see your Savior Jesus, who has come down to us from heaven, who has passed through death and risen triumphantly, who has suffered for your sake, he's someone you should listen to. He's worth giving your attention to. Because it is in Jesus, in his presence, as he is walking with you down the mountain into the valley you are in right now, he knows that your death is not an end, that he will bring you back to the mountaintop to stand in a far green country, the world as it is meant to be, beholding all things in a resurrected body that lives, that is meant to be free from sickness, from suffering. It is through Jesus that heavy curtain is pulled back, and we can stand in the glory of God and rest. Let us pray.